All right. Good afternoon, folks. Appreciate you joining us on this lunchtime webinar. As you can see, I am on the road. I'm actually sitting in a Casey's parking lot. Just finished up an Iowa whitetail hunt, and I'm headed down to Kansas here for a few more days to see if we can't get it done. It's currently much hotter than I would like it to be for November, as I'm sure many of you are dealing with that if you're in the Midwest as well. So today we have on Tucker Schmidt and Nick Blau from Vortex. And if you guys are not already aware, our elite membership gives you the opportunity to get hands-on educational courses for free from some experts throughout the industry on different topics. And Tucker and Nick, they both work in the dealer training sector from Vortex. Tucker has been a lifelong competitive shooter. Nick spent some time in the military, quite a bit of time in the military, and both know their way around, rifles, shooting tips and tactics, optics, all of that good stuff. So, with that, if you guys have questions, whether that's on your rifle setup or how to be more stable or, whatever it may pertain to in, gun hunting whitetails, feel free and please funnel those questions inside of the Q&A section of the bottom little menu tab you have on your Zoom right now. And then the chat spot is a great place for, talking about what upcoming hunt you have. If you're hunting Wisconsin gun opener here in a week, whatever it may be. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Tucker, let him introduce himself and kind of talk about, the basics of what that elite rifle shooting course will cover. And then we'll start into some questions here and try to keep you guys as prepared as possible for your upcoming rifle hunts.
Perfect, Jared. I appreciate you having me. So some of the things we went over in that series was really, from how to zero a rifle to when you get the rifle zeroed and ready, how to get it out in the woods, and preferably how to get stable. We kind of touched on, the importance of getting stable anytime you're taking a shot, but especially if you're taking one, a little further than maybe 50 or 100 yards. So hopefully we can help with some of that. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you guys have questions that you want directly answered, that is what this is going to be by and large, is a live Q&A. So we have a bunch of registration questions that we sent out with the email where you guys signed up for this webinar. First one, tons of reticle options. What is the most appropriate or best for deer hunting purposes? Obviously, there is a lot of different answers for that question, but I don't want you getting off easy and giving large scale generalist answers now, Tucker. We want some pointed best reticle for deer hunting purposes.
Okay, so like you said, there is a lot of answers to that question, right? There's a lot of people that come to us like, I don't want all that stuff in the reticle, but generally that's because they don't know what it means, right? Not, it's not their fault. They just haven't kind of been educated on what that stuff is. That being said, if you're a guy that's going to be shooting, 100 yards and in, typically just a simple V-plex reticle, which is basically a crosshair, will solve most of the solutions you need. But if you are a guy that's on a farm in a blind that may be shooting, 2, 3, 4, whatever, 700 yards, some of that information starts to come into play, right? So you have your drop downs. Those are good if you're going to be doing holdovers. If you do know how to work a dial, that kind of becomes irrelevant. But then you have your wind holds as well. I mean, I like advanced reticles. Doesn't matter if it's a 3 to 15, 4.5 to 22, 4.5, 27, whatever it is. I like to have more information in a reticle. That's me personally. I can still shoot the up close stuff using the crosshair, but if there is big wind and I see a deer at 700, I'd still be able to take that shot fairly quickly. There's a lot of options. You just kind of have to figure out what kind of hunter you are. If you're the guy that needs a V-plex and doesn't want all that stuff in there, that's fine too. We do have a lot of information at vortexoptics.com or any other scope manufacturer, and kind of shows what those hash mark means. It takes a little homework or a little bit of training to kind of learn how to use that stuff correctly. But once you do, man, it's nice to have information. So my preference would be like EBR 7 Delta, EBR 7 Charlie, or any of the G4I reticles in the LHD.
I love it. All right, really good question came up. I think there's probably a lot of people that if they don't have this question, it's probably because they're quite advanced or they don't even know it's a question to ask. First versus second focal plane scopes. Can you break that down into layman's terms on what is first focal plane and what is second focal plane and why you might want one versus the other?
Okay, so that's a question we get a lot too. So Nick and myself, we train lots of dealers. This is a question that always comes up. I hope I can explain it easily. So first and second focal plane, what that basically means is the zoom cell is either in front or behind the reticle. So how that affects the scope is the reticle will either stay the same size because it's in front of the zoom cell to the user, or the reticle will expand and contract with the magnification the user is on. The reason that's important is because if the reticle is always the same size and you have subtensions on that reticle, right? So if you have like a 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil going down the reticle, those measurements will only be true if you are on a certain magnification. First focal plane, that 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil will be 1, 2, or 3 mils throughout the magnification range because it zooms with the mag ring on the scope. Why that's important, if you are in a situation to where you're going to be holding over a target or under, 1 mil may only be 1 mil on, we'll just make up a number, 20 power, or 10 power, whatever that scope is set at. Why that's important is that 1 mil may be 300 yards at, we're making up numbers, so don't hold me accountable, but say we're on 20 power, that 1 mil may be 1 mil, which is about 300 yards with 6.5 Creedmoor on 10 power. But then if you go down to 2 power, that may be 600 yards, right? So if you don't want to have to think about that, first focal plane is probably the way to go. First focal plane isn't the end all be all though, because on lower powers, first focal plane reticles are harder to see. That's when that illumination sometimes comes into play. So for our LHD 4.5 to 22, on 4.5, that reticle is going to be kind of hard to see because it's shrunken down. When you power up, the reticle gets nice and big to where you can see it. But if you are shooting on that lower power, the reticles are kind of hard to see. So that in that situation, if you're typically a closer range shooter, the second focal plane is probably better. And that's probably the rule of thumb, right? If you're going to be shooting a little further, or if you want to be able to shoot a little further, typically that first focal plane is a little better, and the opposite for the second. So I hope that was made sense.
I think your last sentence there, like if you want to do long range shooting, that first focal plane is probably going to be a better option. If you are a more generalist deer hunter shooting 250 yards and in, first
Correct.
focal plane is, yeah. So, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I think you broke it down very well. So this next one, I've heard a lot of experienced shooters say that you really should never be cranking high quality glass like Vortex makes, above 10, maybe 12 power, because it gives you a lot more opportunity to, be less accurate with shooting. Somebody asked a question here, what would you say is the magnification range for someone hunting, longest shot being 250, 200 yards, maybe 300 if they're really poking? Kind of walk through your opinion on really dialing in with magnification and that opening up the room for error, as well as, your kind of recommendation for the magnification of your typical whitetail gun hunting shot.
Okay, so there's a lot of thoughts on this, and there's a lot of reasons for those thoughts, right? So just so people understand how a scope works, just generally with magnification, what you see, field of view, and clarity. So we're just making up numbers, 5 to 25 scope, right? So typically I like a higher power scope. I shoot long range competitive stuff a lot, so it's nice to have a higher end power, but not for shooting 1,000 yards or 1,500 yards, mostly for zeroing. I want a very accurate zero when I'm shooting. I don't want to say, well, it was almost in the middle. No, I want to be right in the middle of that little tiny dot when I shoot so I can make proper corrections. But you will notice if you crank that thing up to 25 and look at 1,000 yards and then turn it down slowly, you'll see as you get down slower, everything starts to get sharper. The reason being, in the middle of that magnification range is where the scopes are typically the clearest. So if I have we'll say 6 and 36 is like our big new Gen 3 scope. If I'm on 36 power, it's still going to look good, But when I go down to 18 to 20 or 15, it's going to look perfect. And that's generally where I typically shoot long range stuff at. To put that into a hunting perspective, like you said, whitetail woods, I mean, I have like a 2 to 10 or a 2.5 to 10. I never am going to have that thing cranked up all the way. The reason is, for one, the scope is the best, like I said, in the middle of that magnification range, but also your field of view is so much better the lower in the scope range you are, like lower magnification, right? Like 36 is, I'm never going to see as much on 36 as I am on 2, right? It opens up your peripherals. You'll be able to see a lot more inside of that glass. And like you said, it really depends on, where you're hunting based on what you need. I always typically shoot lower mag than people think. But I've shot with guys, some of the best shooters in the world, that crank that thing all the way up and shoot well, right? So it's really personal preference, but I like to be able to see more. In my personal opinion, I think that's probably the way to go. So if you're 250 and in, 3 to 9, 4 to 12, 4 to 16 is more than enough. Typically, I'm shooting on 2 or 3.
Love it. All right, interesting question on suppressors here. Zeroing with and without suppressors. Is there much difference there? Are you needing to re-zero if you put a suppressor on your gun? If you're switching that suppressor between your 300 Win and your 243, whatever the case may be, can you talk through some of the complexities, difficulties, or lack thereof with suppressors?
Yeah, hunting with a suppressor is definitely recommended. Once you do it, it's very hard to go back to without, right? It's nice for your ears. It's nice for everything. But they do shift your zero. So if you shift zero your rifle and then attach a suppressor, you are definitely going to have a zero shift. The good news is if it's a good suppressor with a decent way to attach it, whether it's direct thread or some kind of QD or whatever, as long as it's a good system, it should be repeatable. So usually I'll zero the rifle, I'll screw on the suppressor, shoot it, shoot a group. I'll see that I'm okay. I'm 1/10 right, 3/10 up. I'll kind of jot that down in my notes. This gun, this suppressor, this is what it moves. So I can just put that suppressor on, adjust it, and I will check it before I'm going just to make sure. But it is usually repeatable. Screw that suppressor on, make the adjustment, shoot. It should be right in the middle, and it should be good to go. That being said, it's never going to move it 2 feet. You know what I mean? It's going to be close. Again, if you're that 250 in guy, it's probably okay, but I'm always going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to check that zero. I'm going to make that adjustment and just double check before I go, try to, take an animal. So.
Can you guys hear us?
There they are.
All right.
You guys hear us at all? We're kind of working some technical difficulties. We kind of have 2 systems going on, but can you hear us all right?
Yep, you guys are good. So appreciate it. So I'm just basically, this is more or less a live Q&A, and I'm just throwing questions at Tucker. So maybe you can answer this next one. That way you can get a sip of water or something. All right. So long range windage and trying to estimate windage on targets. I know it's more of an art than a science if you don't have a Kestrel or some high-tech equipment. What are some ways that you guys go about judging windage on some of those longer shots you're taking?
Well, like you said, it is definitely an art. There comes some science into it, especially with the wind meters that we have, the Kestrels. If you have tape down the range and you're able to kind of see those kind of telltales as the wind's blowing down there, but we don't always have that situation, especially if we're in an area that we have not necessarily been. So that's when it comes down to that art form. What I'm kind of picking up on those long range shots is what the mirage is doing. If there's a lot of humidity in the air, mirage is a big factor, and it's a big factor that I like to utilize in my benefit to see which way that direction of wind is going. If you can kind of hone in on those mirages at certain distances, it might be right to left, at 300 yards, it might be left to right at 1,000 yards, but all those winds are doing different things, especially if we're in canyons and things like that, that we kind of have to gauge those. The way I kind of gauge them personally is I like to personify them as, walking, jogging, sprinting, all out loping, right? For a horse, we're not running that 20, 25 miles per hour. But if I can pick a spot downrange and watch that mirage kind of float across the field, I'll kind of just say, can I walk that? Can I jog that? Can I run that? And, you know, if we're at a steady walk, you're at 3 miles per hour. If we're at a jog, we're at 6 to 8. If we're at a sprint, we're at, you know, 9 to 12 miles per hour, depending on how athletic you are. So I like to personify that in that aspect. Other telltales I'm looking for is all the environmentals out there, to include the grasses, the birds, the bugs, and everything kind of drifting with that wind. Kind of a cool thing is that if you see like harriers or some kind of predator hawk, they always kind of float over top of their prey, and they actually have to point into the wind. So you kind of get that telltale of where they're actually pointing in the wind. Not all the time we're going to have hawks in our view and being able to see that, but I have noticed that before. Just kind of, you know, there's not a lot going on. Just might as well try to, you know, tune myself into what's going on with the wind and how it's kind of pushing through the valley or, you know, the flat plain. Another thing for gauging that wind as well is wherever that wind is coming from. I like to just think in my mind, if I were to pour a bucket of water into this valley, how would it wash into this valley, up and over the ridges, up and over the treetops and things like that, to get your, you know, your Yetis and your oroscopic and orographic winds. Like it allows me to kind of think what that wind is actually doing in those valleys, just to get a bead on whether it comes from the right side or left side on that target, to where's that wind actually coming from.
I think the first thing you said really stood out to me as a whitetail hunter. It's like, you know, if you spend the time ribboning out a walk-in to your tree stand or something like that, tie a ribbon down range, tie one at 100, tie one at 300. And I think like that in itself seems like a really great tip to kind of judge that windage. So real quick, I mean, obviously this is a way more complex question than I am posing it as. At what distance would you say wind really starts to take effect on a shot?
It really starts to take effect within the first 30 meters. And that kind of goes into more of a technical side of it. But what I'm talking about is aerodynamic jump in our bullets. If we have a much superior ballistic bullet, I mean, you may or may not see it with a muzzle loader or stuff like that. But when the bullet comes into contact with the wind for the first time within the first 30 meters, there is a procession cycle that bullet's actually going through. And think of like a top that you spin on a desk. That thing just doesn't sit there and go to sleep and just stay in the same spot. It actually goes through this procession cycle. It's something that happens so quickly and we don't even really think about it, but it is happening. But when it comes into contact with the wind, if we have a right to left wind and a right spinning bullet, that bullet actually jumps up in the air column a little bit. And if we have a left to right and we still have that right spinning bullet, it actually forces it down because it's creating these high and low pressures on that bullet. So it's acting as, it's still trying to find that sleeping, it's trying to find that sleep procession inside of there. So as soon as that happens, once it falls asleep, and then it's on its way, but once it's trying to find its true center, it happens in the first 30 meters when it comes into contact. You're going to see more of it, more on like higher winds, 15, 20, 25. You're going to see it a lot more. But once it happens, it's done. And we can kind of account that with, the modern ballistic calculators that we have out there today, that it applies it to your dope, that you don't necessarily need to know what's going on with it, because it automatically does it for you if you punch in the right information into your calculator, as well as the right direction the wind is coming from and the mile per hour that wind is coming from. So to answer your question, yes, yes, and it happens very quickly.
And it does happen quickly, and I'll take kind of like a little different angle on that answering that question. Like there's definitely wind input, right? Like there's going to be a point of impact shift because of wind. I think a lot of times when we talk about whitetail hunting, I mean, we're obviously here in Wisconsin. If we're hunting distances that a lot of people commonly think of as whitetail distances, maybe you're sitting in a blind overlooking at, an ag field, or maybe you're in the woods. If you're shooting a modern cartridge, like, we'll go 243 or 6.5 Creedmoor or 270, it would take a really, really stiff wind, probably at least 15 miles an hour, to push you out of the vital zone of a whitetail within 300 yards. I'd say beyond that, you know, and there is no definitive this distance worry about wind and this distance don't worry about wind, because a lot of it will have to do with the speed of the wind. You know, if you're shooting in a clear cut and you can't feel wind in that clear cut, and then that deer is standing 10 yards onto a field just beyond the end of a clear cut, the wind might only really be affecting that bullet for the last 10 yards. At that point, it doesn't really matter what the wind speed is. It's not going to affect you that much. But if you're sitting on a big ag field and you're shooting 300 yards, even if you do have a pretty stiff wind, it's probably not going to blow you out of the vital zone on a whitetail unless you're, you know, talking above 20 miles an hour at a full crosswind. So it kind of depends. Like, there's definitely wind input and it's going to push your point of impact. But in, you know, for all intents and purposes, inside of 300 yards with a modern cartridge shooting a good bullet, you're probably pretty safe, you know, holding just a little bit for wind, but not necessarily needing to do a ton to calculate it. But like Nick mentioned, you know, using something like geoballistics or the Fury app on the phone, you can, you know, pull up a local weather station, see what the wind is doing in your area, and then using a rangefinder that has a capability to lock in the wind direction, you can get a really good idea of what that wind would be.
Love it. Yeah, so for all you in the audience, you know, drop in the chat whether you guys are using a turret and some dope to dial in, whether you guys are just using a holdover, or if both of those things are beyond what you're doing and you're using Grandpa's 30-30 with iron sights, because that'll help direct some of these answers and questions as well if we get a better understanding of how all you guys are shooting. All right, popular question. I want one answer out of all three of you experts here on this panel. Tips for offhand shooting to be more stable. You know, let's say you're in a tree stand, you don't have that front bar on your ladder stand, it's just a hang on, and you know, you're either sitting or standing in that tree stand, you got a deer at 200 yards. What are you doing to stabilize yourself?
Man, that's a tough question, and it is tough to get stable. I mean, if I had to pick one answer, I would say practice, practice it, right, and preferably keep things at short range, because you know, myself, Nick, and Ruben have all shot a lot of rounds offhand, and we still have a hard time hitting a 6-inch plate at 100 yards in our indoor range. Obviously, the more time you spend with that, the better you get. So nothing is better than actually shooting. But other than that, I try to stand square to the target, get my left hand way out in front, and really try to get stable and firm, kind of with my body position, a nice wide stance. Even then, it is tricky, right? 15 in feels pretty good, but once you get past that, it gets tough. So I don't know if that was a good tip, but that's kind of what I do.
So my tip, I guess, would be put on your depends, because it depends. We don't know I don't know all the information as far as like what kind of setup you're in, but it kind of depends what your setup is. Having a backpack, you know, everyone's carrying a backpack up to the tree stand with them. If I can just throw that over my lap and get as low as possible. But I think my biggest tip on this one, shooting offhand, is to drop that mag down as low as you can, so you're not so tunnel visioned on that highest power, because you're not having a lot of support there. So you're going to be looking through that scope, almost like a toilet tube, trying to find that deer. Bring that power down to 3, 4, whatever the case may be. It's going to allow you to have that much wider field of view and to get on that target a lot quicker.
Yeah, just to add on to what Nick said, avoid the micro aiming on your scope, dial the magnification back so your field of view is nice and wide. It's going to make it so that you don't see those minute movements as much, and you don't get that trigger freeze, you don't get target panic. The other thing, just in regards to stance, I mean, Tucker said, you know, have a good wide stance, a solid stance. That's kind of where the practice comes in, is figuring out, do you want your feet squared to the target? Do you want your shoulders squared to the target? You want that left foot out a little further. If you're seated, obviously use your feet to get stable. If you can use kind of more bone structure rather than muscle structure of your body, you know, tuck that elbow in a little bit. You'll see it all the time with guys that shoot offhand, whether that be biathlon, or whether that be like high power across the course type shooting. A lot of times they're going to tuck that elbow in and kind of rest the gun. I don't find that as helpful to me with a hunting rifle. Personally, I like to get my support hand, my left hand. For me, I'm a right-hander, so I like to get a good hand on that gun, and I pull the gun into my shoulder with my left hand, so that I'm not pulling the gun into my shoulder with my trigger finger, my trigger hand. This hand is basically, its job is to pull the trigger. This hand is pulling the gun firmly into my shoulder, so that when I do press the trigger, my trigger finger doesn't put an input into the gun. It doesn't move the gun as I do that. But, Tucker said it, a lot of it's practice. Nick said it as well. Dial that magnification back a little bit so you're not micro aiming.
Love it. A couple real things that quick things that come to mind for me. The Primos trigger stick weighs like nothing and can be set on your tree stand platform. I think that's a great thing to bring along. If you're a little bit newer of a hunter and want more stabilization, the Bog Death Grip tripod. It's a lot more to lug to your tree stand, but I have also seen people set those tripods up on their platform and use that. So those are two non-offhand ways to get more stable. Quick talk about points of contact. I know that's in our elite shooting course, and you guys talk about, filling gaps under your arm with a bag or your backpack or a down puffy jacket. Kind of talk about some of the pros and tips that you guys have on getting more points of contact to eliminate empty space.
I can start on that one, I guess. So, the offhand thing obviously is not recommended if you can avoid it. Lots of things, backpacks, soft goods, like, for instance, we've had bags for Armageddon gear, make a ton of lightweight soft goods that you can then fill voids as well as support the rifle with. Anytime you can get, and I know we've mentioned this in prior things, but might as well touch on it. Anytime we can get a front and a rear support on a rifle, that's going to be when we're the deadliest, right? Most accurate. A shooting bag on a crossbar with a little backpack or something behind the gun to get a front and rear support on a rifle. That's usually how you're going to be the most stable, most comfortable. You're not getting all the shakes. Your heart rate's going to be up. You're going to be excited if you get an animal in front of you. That's why we do it, right? It's exciting. So if that gun is solid and stable, especially on the front and rear, that's going to be, how we provide the best accurate shots. If you don't have that, you mentioned it, tripods. We have a long line of tripods, shooting sticks, anything that you can get on the rifle attached to something solid. It's going to kind of calm that reticle down a little bit so you can take an accurate shot.
Yeah, on that, I mean, a lot of times if I'm sitting in a tree stand, I'll take my backpack and put it on my lap and kind of see if I can almost lean it forward so that my handguard of my gun has a place to rest. I mean, that's something that I've done before, even as rudimentary and rough as, getting out to the tree stand and figuring out that front bar support is broken. So I need something. I mean, grabbing a branch that's got a hook in the front or a Y in the front that you can set that gun on. I mean, really anything, like Tucker said, that you can do to get a front and rear point of contact on that gun.
I think, not to be dead horse or anything, but it's just it's getting the most support as possible for that shot. It's grabbing whatever you can to be more stable. So I'm always looking for more points of contact with my elbows, on my knees, or if I have a bag that's not doing anything, I'm trying to fill as much as I can to have the most stability whatsoever. If that means a tripod, if that means a shooting stick, a backpack, a shooting bag, whatever the case may be, I'm always looking for the most stable position as possible.
No doubt. And I think one other thing that plays into being successful and being more stable is pay attention how you set up your tree stand. Rather than setting it up for comfort or necessarily so when you're sitting on your butt, you're looking down your best shooting lane. If there's a double tree, or maybe you set up your tree stand facing the opposite direction, so when you stand up, you can utilize that tree as a point of contact, so you can use your arm or your hand to push that rifle up against the tree. I think there's a number of ways to get creative just when you're setting up your actual location you're going to hunt from in order to give you a better opportunity to take a stable shot. All right, MOA versus mills. Can you kind of break down what those differences are, why it might matter for a whitetail hunter, and what your guys' recommendation would be on that?
Who wants to
Don't
take
all
this
jump
one?
at once now.
No, go.
I guess I'll start, and I'll let these guys interject as they see fit. Mill versus MOA. It's just two different languages speaking the same solution. Now, I say that in a broad statement. They are different, but they're not so different to where it's almost negligible. But what we're kind of gaining out of mills, and in my personal opinion, is that you don't have as many revolutions in a turret with a mill as you do with an MOA. It's not saying that it's less accurate, but for me, I like to memorize my dopes, and I feel that single digit numbers are a lot easier to remember than double digit numbers. I'm not usually getting out into the 12, 13 mils of on my turret until I get into those 1,200, 1,300 yard distances. But for milliradians, they're intense. All the turrets are intense. And then you have your MOAs that are in quarters. So 3/10 of a mil is roughly one MOA at 100 yards. So if you can just do that conversion, you kind of have this idea of what each size is going to be at different distances. So I like mills a lot better than MOA. I can shoot both. I speak both. I've used them both. I usually have an MOA scope for like a second focal plane, 2 to 10, 2.5 to 10, 3 to 9, whatever the case may be. But I'm shooting inside of 300 with those things. So anything you want to add to that? I felt like I was right.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, really the thing to kind of keep in mind is that the MOA versus mills conversation has only been a conversation with hunters for maybe the last 15 years or so. There was mill scopes available to consumers, long before that, but most of the time they were more like competition or tactical focused optics. Of course, then you get people who are competitors and guys with a professional background using firearm that are going hunting, and they want to use a scope that speaks the language that they know. One of the nice things that kind of Nick mentioned was mills are typically cleaner numbers. They're going to be a little easier to memorize. I was just in Wyoming last week on an elk hunt, and just kind of memorizing like, okay, my 300 yard is 0.9 mils, my 400 is 1.6, my 500 is 2.4. Like that's really simple and really easy to memorize that. And if I was using MOA, I would have been like, 3.3.5 MOA for the first yardage and 5 3/4 for the second yardage and 9.25 for the third yardage. I find that mills are a little bit easier to use. They're a little faster to memorize. But then the thing always comes up where it's like, if you're talking and you're just getting into this and you're asking your hunting group, like, do you guys use MOA or MRAD? And if they all use MOA, it's going to be easier for you to join a group of shooters using the equipment that they're familiar with. So don't just think that mills is always going to be the better system to use, because if everybody you go to the range with and everybody you practice with is using MOA, then you're going to be the odd man out because you picked mills, and you're going to ask them, hey, what was that hold? And they're going to be like, I don't know, you're the one that picked the different system. So there's definitely, like, we see it on the range a lot where if everybody's using mills, it's really easy. And if everybody's using MOA, it's really easy. So kind of ask your peer group what they're using. Ask the people that are your trusted source what they're using. I always equate it very simply to, if you're thinking MOA or you're thinking mills, try not to think inches anymore. You're thinking in the system that your scope is using. So if you're going down the road in your car and your speedometer is in miles per hour, well, the speed limit signs are probably in miles per hour too. But you go to another country and they're kilometers per hour. Well, it's kind of convenient because your speedometer is also in kilometers per hour. So when you pick a scope in MOA and you look at your data for your bullets drop, that's also going to be an MOA. We don't need to think like, okay, how many inches is that? Or how do I equate that now that that, you know, I've got to wonder the vital size of this animal. Think in MOA, think in mils, whichever system you pick, you're going to be able to get the job done with both of them, but try and get out of thinking in inches, because once we speak in angular measurements, inches don't really matter that much.
I think just to touch on, obviously I echo everything that those two said. I think the three of us as a whole typically shoot longer ranges, in turn use mils for the reasons they mentioned. The one thing that people tend to latch on to with MOA and continuing to use that is it's a smaller unit of measurement than a 1/10 mil radian. Most people on the planet will never be able to shoot the difference between the two, so it's kind of irrelevant. And other than that, I think those guys kind of knocked it out of the park, so not much to add there. But most of us shoot mils, and we also have MOA scopes for those second focal plane closer shots that we use in whitetail woods.
Wholeheartedly agree with the tip of use what your comrades are using, because when you have questions, those are going to be the people at your disposal. All right, cleaning a rifle. I hear a lot of different folks of your guys' expertise say different things about cleaning a rifle, as far as I never clean my rifle, or I meticulously clean my rifle. You know, do you guys feel cleaning or not cleaning a rifle affects the accuracy? I think people would be interested in your opinions of a break-in period, on how often you're cleaning that rifle. Just kind of talk about your guys' process, your guys' opinions on that situation.
Okay, I guess I'll start that one. There's a lot of different thoughts. Which one's right? I don't know. I don't know if mine's right or not, but typically every barrel manufacturer, from, you know, top of the line, Bartlett, Krieger, you know, Hart, whatever, they will all recommend some sort of break-in process. So when you get that barrel from your manufacturer, especially, you know, you buy a nice rifle, a nice stock or custom, doesn't matter. There will be a break-in process, and you'll know that. It's easy to tell because the first round you shoot over a chronograph, if it's the very first shot through your rifle versus the 100th round will always be faster. So those bullets going down your barrel smooth things out, get things clean, and which is, you know, a broken in rifle, so to speak. So that part's always important. I don't know the right way to do it. You know, some manufacturers will recommend shoot 1 round clean, shoot 2 rounds clean, 3 rounds clean, up to, you know, 5, 20, whatever. I used to do that because that's what, you know, I learned and people said. Lately, now kind of what I've changed that process to is cleaning it when I get it, just to make sure there's nothing in there, no, you know, particulate or metal shading or anything, which there usually isn't, but it's just a safety measure. Clean the thing out, shoot about 80 rounds through it, clean it out, and then I'm pretty much done. It's broken in my opinion. I noticed the speed has changed, which to me means the barrel's pretty much broken in. Some barrels that might be, you know, 40 rounds, some it might be 150. You never really know what that answer is until you see the speed change. And then as far as cleaning, that's really up to the user. Again, a lot of thoughts on that. For competitive guns or hunting guns, usually by the time I'm done with a season or a match, I'll clean it out. Just keep in mind, when you do clean your rifle, the next bullet's not going to go exactly where you think it is. You've got oil and stuff in there, so you need to foul the barrel back up before you then try to point it at an animal further away. So if you're going to clean the rifle, that's great. We definitely recommend it. You don't want to leave a bunch of water, dirt, crap in there. Just remember, you do have to refoul it before you then take it out to a hunting situation.
Yeah, I guess my addition to that would be cleaning. You know, if it's out and it gets dirty, you know, you shoot it a bunch. Like, there's a difference between using a powder solvent and using a copper solvent. Like, if you use a powder solvent, you probably won't really see too much of a difference. It's just cleaning that powder or fouling out of the barrel. You probably won't see a huge point of impact shift. But if you use a copper eliminator, like an ammonia copper eliminator or something like that, you're gonna see, because you're removing copper out of the barrel, which has smoothed out any imperfections in the barrel, you will see a point of impact shift typically, and you'll see a speed shift. And like Tucker said, you really definitely would want to recheck 0 after you strip copper out of the barrel. Keep in mind also, if you're shooting like a copper solid, like a Barnes or a trophy copper bullet, those will deposit typically more copper in your barrel. And so when you switch from one type of ammo to like, you know, an ELDX or you know, a cup and core bullet, lead core bullet, you will see maybe a little bit of time it takes to break in the barrel between the two types of ammo. You might see a point of impact shift. But, you know, I think there's nothing wrong on the cleaning side with, you know, getting that powder fouling out, and you don't usually see too much of a point of impact shift. But if you do strip the copper out of the barrel, you're going to want to refoul it before you go out and take a shot really at any distance in a hunting situation. That's kind of the main thing. On break-ins, you know, kind of like Tucker, like we go out and like typically check the barrel, run a patch through the barrel, make sure there's no you know, metal shavings, no burrs in the barrel before we shoot them. We'll put some rounds through them. I typically wouldn't take a rifle out into the field unless I've got probably 50 rounds through it. That's a, you know, typically after that, you might not see a huge jump in velocity or a huge change. But if you take a brand new rifle out and shoot your first 5 rounds, zeroing the rifle, and then, you know, 40 or 50 rounds later, you're not zeroed anymore. It's because that barrel is still breaking in. You're building up that copper lining in the barrel. And so you will see typically a point of impact shift and a velocity shift, which a velocity shift will meet a vertical point of impact shift at distance. So all those things to kind of say, like, cleaning your guns is good, but maybe don't think of it as I need to don't strip the copper every time you go to the range. And the other thing would be, whatever you do it consistently, because as you see those changes after cleaning the gun, they're typically pretty repeatable. So make your cleaning regimen very, very repeatable and very consistent.
The biggest
I guess
takeaway,
I have a couple things to add to that. One, cleaning too much, taking to the range, shooting 50 rounds, coming home, clean it. You know, the following week you do the same thing and you keep doing that over and over again. You can clean something too much, and I've seen a lot of barrels die a lot quicker when there's meticulous cleaning over and over and over again. You know, and that might just be something that I've seen. I've also seen guns that have never been cleaned once before. They've had 10,000 rounds in them and they're still shooting a one MOA group at, you know, 1,000 yards. So I've seen both sides of that. So it's kind of like, you know, what Tucker and Ruben both said. It's stick to your regiment and be firm with that regiment as far as cleaning goes. An example, so I have a 6.5 PRC that I put about 150, almost 200 rounds on it now. And I'm just getting it kind of dialed in for a hunt for myself. And I don't like how it's grouping, because it wasn't grouping the same as it was, and, you know, before that. So I told myself, hey, let's knock all the carbon out of this. I'm not going to take the copper out, because it's already laid down that foundation in the lands and grooves. I still want to keep that. I'm not at the point to where I need to, because I've only shot about 150 rounds, but I'm starting to see a group size kind of open up a little bit. And that's kind of indicative to, I need to clean it. I need to address some things, go over my torque, my action screws, just to kind of do a clean sweep of that. But my cleaning regimen is about 150, 200 rounds through a gun. I won't clean it until that point. Granted, I saw it open up. I should have cleaned it before that, but I didn't. So I started to zero it, and it kind of opened up on me. So what I'm just going to do is just punch the barrel with some carbon remover. Take a bore brush, go about 8 to 10 times, good brushes on that, and then run a dry patch through and clean up everything. And then that's basically all I'll do. I'll maybe oil down the bolt a little bit, maybe put some grease on it just to protect it a little bit. And then refoul it. And I'll put about probably 5 to 10 rounds on it just to get a good foul once it starts singing right for me. And then I'll know it's good to go.
So the big takeaways that I just heard, I mean, Nick, you just hit the last one on your very last comment there. 5 to 10 rounds is good to refoul a barrel. Okay. The other takeaway, don't clean your damn gun the night before opener.
There you go.
All right. So there's a couple questions about like scope glare, you know, getting that beam of light that really kind of fouls up your ability to see clearly. What do you guys got for recommendations to reduce that glare on those bright sunny days?
Go ahead, Rube.
All right. Make sure your lenses are clean on the exterior. Typically the worst thing that can happen is for you to have some residue on your objective lens and on your eyepiece. The number of times that we've talked to customers that say their scope isn't as clear as it used to be, and we can go in with rubbing alcohol on the lenses or with a lens cleaner. I mean, Windex is fine, honestly, but go in, get all the residue out of the exterior surfaces of your scope lenses, and you'll be amazed. The same thing happens in your truck windshield. It looks better. You get less glare, less reflections. You can, sometimes when you're zeroing, if you find that you're having a hard time with reflections on your objective, you can turn the magnification up a little bit. That can typically cut down the glare, because you are narrowing that beam of light coming through the scope as you increase your magnification. You're narrowing the exit pupil. The other thing, a lot of our scopes ship with sunshades. If you can run a sunshade, that sometimes can help depending on the angle that the sun is coming in your objective. But really the biggest thing is keep your lenses clean and use a little lens cleaning pen. First use the brush portion to get all the dust and grit out of there. Have a thing of canned air, blow all the dust and residue out, any grit, and then go in with like Windex or a lens cleaning spray. You can use, anti-fog like cat crap or like the Vortex lens cleaning kit. A bunch of manufacturers have lens cleaning kits, but keep your lenses clean. That is the number one thing that you can do to reduce glare.
Easy. Love it. All right. We are going to give away some Blaze Orange onX hats. We're going to post the giveaway link in the chat right now. So you guys can be out there wearing a new lucky hat for your next rifle hunt. So it's only going to be open for a few hours. Make sure to fill out that giveaway link right now as it gets posted here. We're going to take just a couple more questions, and then we're going to bid you guys adieu to go shoot straighter at some whitetails this fall. Parallax. At what distance does parallax become a consideration? Is it something that the general whitetail hunter has to worry about?
So parallax, so kind of to describe parallax real quick before I get into it. So parallax is actually a perception thing. We're perceiving the target and the reticle. So you have two different things you're looking at through that scope. And going back to our speedometer analogy here, but if you are driving the car and you have your passenger in the other car, that passenger looks over to see what speed they're going. That passenger might perceive that speed to be 80 miles per hour, but the driver is perceiving that speed to be 70 miles per hour. So the perception from where it's actually printed on the car and where that actual needle is different from the two different sides. So when we don't come into contact with our rifle the exact same way every time, we are inducing parallax. We see our target and we see our reticle, but we might be seeing at either a left or right angle or a high and low angle. So what we're trying to do is eliminate as much parallax as possible. And to do that, there is a side knob or a parallax knob or target focus on the left side of our scopes, and most all have them, and some are fixed parallax. And we can talk about that too. But those scopes are designed to be in focus from a certain distance. And when we dial that parallax, we can actually move that focus, that depth of field into focus. So if we have a 100-yard shot, we dial in our parallax to get that target in focus. Now we have 1,000 yards. So we dial in that parallax to get that field in focus. So when it comes to different targets, that is the variable, and we control that variable by the side of the scope. What is not a variable is actually the reticle, and we can fine tune that or prescribe that reticle to our eye. And all of our eyes are different. We all see a little bit differently, or have glasses or LASIK or whatever the case may be. But the diopter is something that actually adjusts the focus or the refinement of that reticle, and that's always going to stay fixed. So when we take our side parallax and we focus in those different variable distances, we're actually aligning it to the same focus that we have focused our reticle. And we have reduced parallax by, 90 to almost 100%. And it's something you can't totally get rid of. It's best to try to get rid of that parallax as much as possible. But coming onto the rifle the same way every time, dialing that diopter to have a fine refinement of that reticle, and shifting your parallax knob or your side focus knob to have each target that you have in front of you at this crystal clear focus to match both of those planes together.
A good way to kind of illustrate parallax is when we talk about parallax, we're talking about parallax error. So it's the difference in where the reticle is perceived versus where the image is perceived. So one of the easiest analogies to think is if you want to understand what's happening when you see a parallax shift. So let's just say you lock your rifle in a vise and you look through the scope at a target. When you move your head side to side behind the scope, it might also look like the reticle is moving. And what's happening, the practical application is when you shoulder that rifle and you're looking through the scope, if your cheek and your eye aren't in the same position every time you shoot, you might have a little bit of point of impact shift. Now, at 100 yards with a fixed parallax scope, you shouldn't have any shift because the parallax is fixed at 100. But if you take a 3 to 9 Diamondback with a fixed parallax and you shoot at 50 yards, it might look like the reticle is walking all over the target just because you move your head. Even though the gun is locked in a vise, when you move your head a little bit, it looks like that crosshair is moving. So an easy way to illustrate that, take your hand, put it in front of your face, take your finger, put it halfway in between your hand and your face, and move your head side to side. It looks like your finger's moving, but it's not. When we have that adjustable parallax on the side of the scope, what we're doing is we're bringing these two images onto the same plane. Now I can move my head side to side. My finger doesn't look like it's moving. The same thing is happening with your reticle in relation to the image of that you're shooting at. One quick thing to note about parallax, it's going to be more noticeable the closer you get. So if you have a scope that has a fixed parallax at 100 yards and you shoot at a target at 25 yards, the parallax error can be way more than it would be if you were shooting a target at 200 yards with a 100-yard fixed parallax. One of the best analogies I ever heard was the angle that you have to hold your hand to point at the top of a skyscraper is really drastic when you're standing at the bottom of the skyscraper. Then when you go a mile away, you move your arm a little bit to point to the top of the tower. Now you go 5 miles away, you move your arm a little bit less. And then to go 10 miles away, you barely move your arm at all to point to the top of the tower. So as we get further away, parallax error becomes less and less of a concern. But really the big thing to note is that you wouldn't want to have your parallax on an adjustable scope set to 300 and then shoot, say, a 50-yard target, because you might have a couple of inches or more of parallax error.
Getting deep in parallax. I like it. All right. We're going to post the giveaway link one last time. And my final question, I want an answer from each of the three of you, ideally a different one. If you're getting a new scope for your whitetail hunt, what are you shopping from Vortex?
Man, that's an easy one for me. Typically whitetail, you're not shooting super far. We're kind of snobby when it comes to glass. There's a lot of answers, a lot of good stuff, but the LHD 3 to 15 is, that's what I'd take. The second focal plane, so the reticle stays the same size. Anything in that razor lineup is going to be premium. So that's what I'd take.
Ready? I'll go with the 2.5 to 10 Viper HS. Really, absolutely love that scope, especially for whitetail stuff inside of 150, 200 yards in the timber. Yeah, I like that scope a lot.
I will go just to be different from these guys. I really like a 3 to 9 or a 4 to 12, particularly if Tucker's scope is the right choice for a guy sitting on an ag field who might shoot 300, 400, 500 yards. I'll go with a 3 to 9 Diamondback, and the reason is that you can get the dead hold BDC reticle in, running that scope at 9 power. Even at the max magnification, the Diamondback has an industry-leading field of view for 1-inch scope tubes. So super wide field of view. It's got a usable reticle if I need to take a shot out to 300 or 400 yards. With Dad's 270 that he gave me, or with a 30-06, like easy peasy, no frills, just a very simple scope and really wide field of view and good in low light.
Awesome. Well, Tucker, Nick, Ruben, greatly appreciate all your guys' expertise and the time. We just posted the giveaway link one more time. to all of you in attendance. Greatly appreciate you guys coming out. And again, if you are not already an onX Hunt Elite member, all of this knowledge plus like another 12 hours worth is in the elite shooting course that we did with these guys. We have a Western one and a whitetail one. Just go to onxmaps.com, navigate to the hunt page, navigate to elite, and you will find that Vortex course that I am talking about. There's a ton of knowledge in there, and highly recommend you guys check that out before you head to the stand. You know, Michigan, Wisconsin, those are both openers coming up, as well as you know, Illinois. So if you guys are getting out in the woods in the next week, good luck. Vortex, gentlemen, appreciate your time, and bid y'all adieu.
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it.